Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Hey, welcome back, brothers and sisters. It's time for another weekly Mormon news roundup where Deves and Al ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. We have a very special episode this week, and it's not just because my co-host Deves is off on the other side of the world. He's currently in England going to, he went to a wedding for one of his family members, so we're excited for him that he gets to go and travel the world, but also that's not what makes this episode so special. What's so special is this is the episode where I have our own sponsor from Signature Books, Devery Anderson, on, and we're going to do a little interview with him. He's decided to join us, and we're going to show him how we do things here at the weekly Mormon News Roundup. So thank you very much, Devery, for coming on and joining us this week.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. All right. So just to go over some of the things we're going to talk about this episode, after we do our interview with Devery, we're going to discuss some of the different highlights of the week, which is hashtag Safe Church, Safe Children petition. And this has been released in hopes to protect LDS children from potential abuse due to, an article that we actually reported on a few weeks ago. In fact, I think it's been a couple months now. In Minnesota, there was a sexual predator that actually was able to pray again because the church didn't do any background check on him. So that's what this petition's all about. Also, we're going to go and talk about how the Orem Utah temple had caught fire this past week during construction. And we're going to look into that a little bit and see if it was nefarious or if it was just an accident, because sometimes these things do happen during construction. Also, we're going to talk about the Pioneer Day and Mormon pioneer history that we don't talk about anymore. And we got much more coming. So feel free to come and join up with us. We're at mormonnewsroundup.org. You can email us direct at collab@mormonnewsroundup.org. We're also available on Twitter. You come see our Patreon, our Facebook, and we're also on YouTube. So let's see. We've got, all right, just going through the notes here. All right, so we've got Devery Anderson, and he is, let's see, what's your position with Signature Books, Devery? I'm
the marketing marketing director at Signature Books.
All right, and we certainly appreciate you partnering with us. So I guess first off, let's start with some of the other things. Let's see, you just came back from the Sunstone Conference. That's usually held in Utah over the last couple of days. So how did that go?
It went well. I spent most of the time at the Signature Books table, showing and talking about our books and selling them to people who were interested. And so my experience was, for the most part, out in the display area and talking to a lot of people who came by to visit. So I didn't get to really see any of the sessions.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, that's a shame. Yeah, I would love to go to Sunstone someday. I've never had the opportunity, and it just seems like, it always falls during your work week. So unless you have some sort of ties to it, it seems like you got to really arrange to be there. So I do hope to meet up with you there someday, though.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So do you make a lot of contacts down at Sunstone?
Yes, we over the years it's been good. We, typically I like to attend some sessions, and if there's some papers that either could be developed into a book, or perhaps the presenter is planning to do a book, we like to see if they'd be interested in publishing those with Signature. So that's always on our mind while we're there, and that has happened. We've had people come to the table. In fact, I had some this year come by and pitch some ideas, and they sounded like books we would want. So just ask them to send us a proposal when the time comes, when they're ready to publish. And then we'll go from there and see, if everything holds up well and the scholarship is good and thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
And so we make those kinds of contacts, seem like each time. And we have to weed through some of those. They're not always stuff that we would publish, but there's a steady stream, at least, of interest. And of course, I love seeing people I haven't seen for a while. Sometimes I only see them at Sunstone, so I have friends I see once a year. Some of them show up also at the Mormon History Association or John Whitmer. So some we see more often than others, but it's great to socialize and great for business as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that a lot of those circles intersect at different places too.
Right.
So one of your famous books is about Emmett Till. Can you tell us a little bit about Emmett Till?
Well, yes, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American youth who lived in Chicago, but he had family in Mississippi. So in 1955, he went by train from Chicago to Mississippi along with a great uncle and a cousin. And they went down the intent was for him to spend the last 2 weeks of his summer vacation in Mississippi. He got into trouble being from the North and not understanding the ways of the South. He, when one evening after picking cotton with his cousins and great uncle, they went into a small country store just to get some refreshments. He bought some bubble gum, but he was a show-off type kid who liked attention and that. And he said or did something inside the store to offend the woman behind the counter, a 21-year-old woman named Carolyn Bryant. It was probably something very minor on his part that he just thought was funny. But her being from the South thought differently. She followed him out of the store, and outside he waved and said goodbye instead of goodbye, ma'am, which upset her. And then he whistled at her, gave her a wolf whistle. Mm-hmm. And so it was a taboo thing to do at the time. And so the woman's husband and half-brother found out about it, her husband's half-brother. 3 days later, they kidnapped him at gunpoint in the middle of the night, took him out to the Tallahatchie, took him to a shed in a neighboring town, beat him, shot him, and then threw him in the Tallahatchie River and weighed his body down with a 75-pound cotton gin fan. His body surfaced. The men were arrested on kidnapping. Once the body surfaced, they were arrested. They were charged with murder. They went on trial a few weeks later, but an all-white, all-male jury acquitted them. Mm-hmm. So it set off protests all over the world, really. Yeah, and it was a very famous case that, because of the tragedy involved with Emmett Till and his mother, when she saw what they had done to him, and when they sent the body back to Chicago, she insisted on an open casket funeral. And so that gave the case national publicity. The trial and the acquittal gave it international publicity. Yeah. And it was a case that really propelled, as the subtitle of my book goes, propelled the civil rights movement. Yeah. And it's still talked about today. It's in the news quite often still. And my book was the basis for a miniseries recently that ran on ABC called Women of the Movement. Yeah. And it was a 6-part series about the Emmett Till case. And I got to go and actually be in it too, as I played a juror, because they held the trial in the original courtroom, and I wanted to be a part of that and see that take place as it did. And I felt like I went back in time, and it was a great experience. The show is currently streaming on Hulu for anybody who wants to see it. It's called Women of the Movement. Women of the Movement.
Absolutely. Go and check that out. I'll be looking for you, Devery, in the juror box. Okay.
All right. Episodes 4, 5, and 6. You'll see me there.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely a compelling story. And as you were relaying it, I realized, I've heard this story several times, and I knew that name was very familiar. So now I put the link between the two. What sparked your interest in research and writing?
Well, as far back as I can remember, I loved to write. When I was an adult with small children, this was pre-internet, bought my first computer, and I was determined to write. I forgot what it was like now to be on a computer when there was no internet access. I think I brought up Word Perfect and would sit and stare at the screen and think, I want to write, but what am I going to write about?
Mm-hmm.
I think at first I wanted to write fiction. I think I had an idea for a novel in mind, but I would attempt it and nothing would happen. But I had this desire, but no real path to do it. And I think I just didn't know what I was doing. I wanted
Mm-hmm.
something, but had no clue what to do. And in time, I realized that I was more interested in historical research and writing. And that all began in the summer of '95. Then I signed up on the internet with those after having received an America Online disc in the mail way back then, and signed on to the internet. And over the years, of course, that's been what's aided me to research, but as well as in person and archives and that. But once I had an actual idea in mind of what to write about, and I saw that it was consuming me, I just followed that path based on something that just clicked. And I've had other ideas since then, but whenever it was with varying degrees of enthusiasm. But once something clicks in my head, I always know I'm going to follow through on that. Something just happens where it's like, wow, this is your next project. And that's how I proceed now. But it all started with my interest in, I've had the interest in Mormon history, and I've been an editor or co-editor of 4 books on Mormon history, a 3-volume set on the history of temple worship in the LDS Church, and also the minutes of the Salt Lake School of the Prophets. Those are my 4 so far Mormon-related books. I'm writing a biography of Willard Richards that I've been working on for a long time, and I'll have that done next year. And I'm also doing a biography of Bruce R. McConkie for a small series, a short series. And I mean, it's an ongoing series of biographies, but they're short, brief biographies to give people a chance to read and get a good overview of someone's life if they can read it in a couple of days or so. And my Bruce R. McConkie volume is going to fit in that series. But my interest in the civil rights movement began really with my interest in Mormon history there, my interest in the Black priesthood ban, priesthood and temple ban. And I became fascinated with that, especially when I researched or read what scholars had written, that there was no real basis for it. There was no revelation. It didn't go all the way back to Cain and Abel, and blacks were not unvaliant in the pre-existence or cursed. And it was such a load lifted off of me to not feel like I had to really believe those things. And I kind of wanted to shout from the rooftops to everybody who'd listen about the real story behind the priesthood ban. And that began it. And then I just over time developed an interest in the larger African-American experience, and hence my book on Emmett Till as a result. And I just finished one on a figure named Clyde Kennard, and then that'll be out in the spring.
Oh, good. We look forward to reading about that one too. Yeah. So with regards to signature books, what is the purpose of signature books? What's kind of their mission in publishing?
Well, it was founded in 1981 as a way to give voice to authors whose books really, at the time, wouldn't have found a home elsewhere. Back in 1972, the church commissioned a 16-volume sesquicentennial history of the church that would be ready by 1980. And Leonard J. Arrington oversaw that project, but because there were serious scholars involved, and they were going to touch on some controversial areas of church history, because this was they had set out to have a very serious, thoughtful series that would really tell the truth about church history. It made some of the brethren nervous, and so the project got canceled. And the authors were left, if they wanted to publish the books on their own, and some did through other publishers. They were going to come out through Deseret Book. Some came out through University of Illinois. Signature Books published one. Deseret Book did publish one or two as well, but most of them were never written. But Signature Books came along because I think the time the founders of Signature Books were upset that this project got canceled, and they wanted to be a home for this type of research and writing. And that's what it's been over the years. In the 40 years since, we've published some of the best stuff, biography, history, documentary history, poetry and fiction, all of that. If it's a scholarly work on Mormons, Utah, and the West, then we want it. And we've got competition as well, but now and more than we had then. But we're still around and still want to publish the best in those areas, and that's our purpose.
Yeah, and how long have you been with Signature Books?
September 1st, it'll be 11 years.
Oh my, long timer.
Yeah, it feels like it just was yesterday that I started, but it's been a while now. So.
It sounds like you really enjoy your purpose, and it sounds like you're a really good fit for the purpose that Signature Books is about. And I really hope that as you get into our podcast, you'll see that our purpose with this podcast is very much aligned with that. I know that you sponsored a previous podcast. The Mormon Newsroom, I think it was, or no, what was it?
I think that's what it was called.
Something like that. But pretty much our purpose is to just take head on all of the topics that relate to Mormonism. Some of that's promotional, some of that is detracting, some of it is critical. But we don't really shy away from it. The good, the bad, or the ugly. We'll take a look at it and see where it stands with regards to everything. So
and
we really appreciate you partnering.
It's all part of it, and it all needs to come out, and then just let the chips fall where they may, and then figure out what it all means from there. Yeah. And I think that's important.
Yeah. So now Signature's latest book is Lighthouse, Gerald and Sandra Tanner, Despised and Beloved Critics of Mormonism. This is an excellent book that I would love to get into. So what can you tell us about this work?
Well, this is an important one, and I think some people will look at it and think, oh, Signature's anti-Mormon now because you're giving voice or support to Gerald and Sandra Tanner or whatever they might want to think. And that's not it at all. And one thing I've learned over the years that I didn't really know Gerald. I'd met him a few times, but he died in 2006. And in the last 15, 16 years or so, I've come to know Sandra better because she's a Facebook friend. And then, of course, interviewing her for our podcast as well. Yeah. And you know her. I'm very, very nice, very good person. And so that's important for people to understand, whether you agree with what they do or what they've devoted their lives to doing. There's still the person there that's very good, very good. People can be great, even if you don't agree with what they do. And that's a great example of that. Plus what they do, you can't examine Mormonism for the last, half century, more than that now. Their work started around 1960.
True.
You can't examine that without dealing with the Tanners because they made Mormon history, Mormon documents and Mormon publications that were long forgotten or inaccessible. They made those available. So Mormon scholars have utilized them over the years as the source to get hard to find publications. Most of those are available now, online, and maybe they took their copies and digitized them. Who knows? But plus, they've been very critical of the church. They've written books, before there was the CES letter, there was Mormonism, Shadow or Reality. They're big, I can't remember how many pages, 500-600 page book. And very hard hitting. I mean, you had to deal with the stuff that they brought up. And when people just dismiss critical books as, oh, this is just full of lies, you have to really go in and read it and research it and realize that, no, that's not the case. Now, maybe the same conclusion doesn't have to always be reached, but you at least have to acknowledge the accuracy and then go from there. But their work has been important for that reason. Gerald Tanner was able to discover on his own that the Salamander letter, the creation by Mark Hoffman, was a forgery. When church leaders and scholars who are really examining the handwriting, maybe more than the actual content and how it may have been familiar with other stuff. That's what Gerald was able to see. That's how he understood it was a forgery. The Mormon scholars are focusing on the handwriting and that to determine that, yes, Martin Harris wrote this or Joseph Smith wrote that. And so they were the ones that knew that it was a forgery, and the church was saying it wasn't, or at least was leaning that strongly that it was, and that it probably was, and we're trying to do damage control as a result of that. And so they've been an important influence. They've been an important presence. And so it's important to get to see who they really were and really are. Sandra's still around, still running the Utah Lighthouse Ministry. So it's a book that I'm proud that we published. And it shows that Signature isn't afraid to shy away from that kind of thing. And we recognize the importance of it. And that's the main thing.
And I'm very glad that you do. I have a lot of respect for the Tanners. The thing about the Tanners that's always impressed me is that they're so committed to the truth or accuracy. You can call their works anti-Mormon lies, but you're going to have a devil of a time trying to prove them wrong.
Right.
Because they're just that committed to the truth, wherever it lies,
And there are some things, that I remember when I started reading Shadow Reality years ago. I think the first chapter talked about Mormons and moon men, and did Joe Smith believe in moon men? And I thought there were some good responses to that particular issue, that they didn't examine that as well as they could have, and that other sources really shed light on that. So there are issues like that. Those are pretty minor ones, but their work wasn't always right. But for the most part, I think the issues they raised were valid. The documentation behind it, you can't ignore it, and you have to be able to approach it in such a way that if you want to stay in or stay believing, you have to do it from an informed perspective. And if you don't, then you're just embarrass yourself.
Exactly.
If you try to respond to that kind of thing without at least knowing.
There's certainly there's plenty of members of the church that stay with the church, and they just kind of reinvent their relationship with the church. And,
a lot of scholars who stay in know these issues, and but they have to admit that Joseph, they usually preface it with problems Joseph had, or they acknowledge that you can't look at Joseph, the Book of Mormon, or the Brethren then or now as infallible, or even as you really have to reevaluate it all and come to a new understanding, or you simply are.
It seems like
just got your head in the sand, and you can still. I think a lot of people would argue that even to stay in at all, you'd have to have your head in the sand, but at least be informed. And this, then you have to deal with the Tanners.
I think anybody that's looking to learn more and more about the church is going to sooner or later have to take off the rose-colored glasses that we used to see the church through, and just start to look at it through a harder line and understand that there's a lot of
one thing I'm grateful about, and I don't know how my life would have been different, but when I read the Tanners, it was in the late 80s, early 90s, when there wasn't the internet, when I read Shadow Reality. And it was nice to be able to read it without a lot of people just pecking at me from, online, that I didn't have to worry about. I didn't have a million voices coming out. I could just, look at it and study it on my own. I think it's harder to do now because there's so many people, harping at you online that influence your thinking, or that, create a bias for you. And I felt like I was able to do that and come out with a healthier, at least, perspective than I would have had I had social media at the time. So to me, that was a plus. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not for everybody, but for me, it was a plus.
Oh, for sure. It seems like nowadays there is quite a fight online on both sides of it. There's
because you get it from people who haven't read a thing. I see people who are outside the church that haven't read much, people who are inside that haven't read much, and neither one of them, they have nothing to tell me.
And there's nowhere to meet in the middle for them, is there? So I guess, one of the things that we've been, pitching on our podcast is this book by Romney Burke about Susa Young Gates, the daughter of Mormonism. Do you want to walk us through that one a little bit?
Yes, it's a very important book. Surprisingly, there had never been a full-length biography on her. There have been articles, and there was a master's thesis or a dissertation, one of the two, on her. But now we have a full-length published book, and it's important. Brigham Young had 56 children.
Yeah.
And there are only a handful that you can name. Brigham Young Jr., and the others right now escape me besides Susa. Susa Young Gates is another. She's very important because she was born through one of the Plural wives, and she became very prominent in the church. And her life spanned the late 19th and early 20th century. So she was around for some of her contemporaries were, B.H. Roberts and others who lived in that period. And so she was able to see the church change. And she also was, within the church, she was important because she was the founder of the Relief Society magazine and the Young Women's Journal, and had several articles in both of those. And she published several novels. I think she published poetry. She was a co-author of The Life of Brigham Young with her daughter. And that was a well-known book. It's been reprinted several times, I believe, over the years. And she was also at BYU. She's to this day, she's still the longest-serving member of the board of trustees at Brigham Young University. But she was popular. She was well-known outside of Mormonism as well because she was active in the suffrage movement. Yeah. She knew people like Susan B. Anthony and others, and was very influential there. She joined the National Women's Council. That's where she came to know Susan B. Anthony and others as well. But so she had her life within the church that was very important, and she was prominent outside the church. She was, and plus through all this, she was a daughter of Brigham Young, and so that gave her a voice as well. That it probably provided a bit of a path for her too that she wouldn't have had otherwise. But her life was difficult as well. She had been married once, and that marriage ended in divorce, and it was a very painful one for her. She never even never mentioned his name after their divorce. Yeah. And she lost several of her children. I think eight children. She bore at least, I think it was 12 or I think it was 13 children that she bore, and 8 of them died. And she also had, health problems as well. And but she was just very important. And it's nice and we want more work like this. There are so many important women in the church, in church history that, and we've seen a lot of things over the last few years. The diary series that USU Press has published with, I don't know, a dozen or more diaries, annotated diaries of Mormon women. That's been, an important contribution. But we need to see more biographies. We need to see their lives play out and understand the contribution they made and how important they were. And for this, it's kind of a first for us in a lot of ways. Sadly, we'd like to see more of this, and hopefully this will be the beginning, the Susa Young Gates, of much more on women's history and biography. And I'd love Signature to be the publisher of the best of that.
Yeah, let's hope so. There's certainly a handful of very notable women throughout LDS history, and not just Emma Smith, but like Eliza R. Snow is another big name. Susa Young Gates. More modern, I should say, is Sherry Dew. There's plenty of stories out there, and we would love to look forward to hearing a lot more of those in the future.
And so much really started with the scholarly and modern biography writing with Mormon Enigma, which is almost now 40 years old, the biography of Emma Smith, which for a lot of people it would have been tempting still, even though it was about her, to write it through Joseph, to have Joseph be the prominent character. That would have been how a lot of biographers would have done it. But Linda Newell and Val Avery were determined that you not come away seeing Joseph as the prominent character, that this is a biography of Emma and it needs to be her story. And they did it well. And that, I think, was such a turning point. And I wish it would have resulted in just an avalanche of women's stories being written since then. But there have been some, but certainly needs to be a lot more. So maybe the Susa Young Gates one will be the new turning point for all that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see if we can get the wheels turning on that wagon a little bit faster. That'd be great. Let's see. So how's the reception been for this book about Susa Young Gates?
So far, it's been very well, and so far we've just really heard from people who've read it who really liked it. It just came out in the last couple of months, and so I haven't seen reviews yet. I think I have seen a couple of online reviews on some blogs, waiting to see them begin to be published in the scholarly journals. But I'm so far people have liked it, and the people who told me they've read it have really liked it. And the author, Romney Burke, did a great job on it. He's not a descendant, but his wife is, I believe, a great granddaughter of Susa Young Gates. And so they've been married I think they got married in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And so he's had,
I think he was a doctor, wasn't he?
What's that? I'm sorry?
I believe he was a doctor.
Yeah, he practiced in Portland, Oregon for years. He's retired. He was a urologist and retired, but then he's been on a couple of missions.
Yeah.
He wrote this book right before he and his wife went to Korea on a mission, and their mission was delayed some because of COVID. So they were in town dealing with our editor while they were actually missionaries. I think they were staying near Temple Square or something, just waiting to be able to go. And they finally went, and they got back last year. And so we timed the book to come out after they got back so that he could speak about it and help market it. And so he for years, I think his wife told him stories and plenty of and to gain interest for him. And so he determined years ago that he would do this book, and finally did it. And then one of the things that helped him was that Susa Young Gates papers, which everyone thought didn't exist or were lost, were found in a relative's garage. Basically, there were boxes and boxes. I mean, just tons of stuff. And so that gave him the material he needed to really make this what it needed to be. And so,
she was.
That's the result of it all. And he did a great job. He's a good writer. He researched it well, and it was sympathetic, but he didn't shy away from anything either. So.
No, let's see. You gave us a pre-publication edition that we could look through, and I made about 40 pages through before we timed out on that one. But boy, it's well written and it's well researched. And I guess it's a good thing that he didn't handwrite it, because doctors are notorious for their handwriting. And
that's a good thing.
Boy, it's well written. Yeah, it's a great piece of work.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Signature Books, www.signaturebooks.com. We invite you to check out their latest book written by Romney Burke, which is entitled Susa Young Gates, Daughter of Mormonism.
Brigham Young had over 50 wives and 56 children, but none has better name recognition than daughter Susa Young Gates. She lived from 1856 and died in 1933. Yet she, like so many women of Mormonism's past, has remained a mystery to most church members. In Susa Young Gates, Romney Burke, the author, paints a portrait of a strong woman who rose to prominence within the church, fought for the rights of women throughout the country, yet dealt with personal trials and her share of heartbreak.
Hey everybody, it's D-Vase here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we get into the news? Or?
Well, just that, we have some other stuff coming out, a few more things, but by the end of the year, D. Michael Quinn, who passed away last year, his family gave us permission to publish his memoir that he had written.
Oh, wow.
And it was still on his computer, and they were able to find it and get it to us, and that's being edited right now, and that'll be out in the next few months. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be good. There's a lot of good material in there. He's very candid about his life, mm-hmm. and so that'll be something people can look forward to. One is if one of our most popular books was Todd Compton's book In Sacred Loneliness, mm-hmm. The Plural Wives of Joseph Smith, where of the 33 women he believed at the time, he may have found others or believe now others have a stronger case for being mm-hmm. wives. But there were 33 in his original book that he believed firmly were Joseph had married. And so he gave biographical sketches of each woman. Well, his new book is called In Sacred Loneliness, The Documents, which he provides the primary source material for his book for the different women he wrote about. It's their diaries, I think letters, and the stuff that comes directly from them. And that's been released on Kindle already, so you can buy it for $9.99 on Kindle. But the hardback was delayed because of some problems with the press and paper shortages and that. But that should be out in the next few months, and it's a handsome volume that will stand next to the original. They look like each other for the most part, and they go. That'll be out soon. Todd spoke about that book yesterday at Sunstone, popular session that a lot of people attended. So those are the ones that are coming out by the end of the year. Two of them anyway. We have Michael Hicks's memoir. He's a retired BYU professor, just retired in the last couple of years, and his memoir called Wineskin: Freakin' Jesus in the 60s and 70s. I think that's the title. I don't have it right.
That's a great title.
So have a book by a member of the church who has takes a new look at the Great Apostasy to have encouraging people to have more sympathy for the people who lived in those dark ages who didn't know anything and who were living in darkness. He kind of sheds different light on that well, maybe they weren't so bad. Yeah. So we've got that coming as well. These are the ones before the end of the year that we're looking forward to. And then we're lining up our calendar for next year, which I can't talk about yet, but there's great stuff coming out.
Sounds like it. I mean, if that what you could share with us was just any kind of precursor, you've got some big things on the burner.
Yes, and so people can just check out signaturebooks.com as often as they'd like. And on our website, you can sign up to be on our newsletter or on our mail list to learn about new releases, book signings, all that type of thing. So if you want to sign up, just go to signaturebooks.com.
For sure. Hey, thank you very much, and thank you to Signature Books for sponsoring this podcast and partnering with us and as we discuss all the things pertaining to Mormonism. So, thank you very much, Devery, for joining us this week. And I guess with that, let's get to the news. Just one follow-up from last week. We had the revelation of a possible picture of or daguerreotype of Joseph Smith was released, and the Deseret News is actually kicking back a little bit. It's not, let's see, should we say like a big kickback? This is more like let's say an opinion piece article that is by Tad Walsh from July 28th, and he says that Joseph Smith headlines went too far, and he does a lot of criticism of things like Newsweek or other publications that we're pretty quick to jump on it to say, hey, we found a picture of Joseph Smith, the Mormon founder, that the first actual picture that's ever been found of him. Well, they've had several pictures that have been found that were suspected of being him, but seems like when they've investigated these photographs over the years, none of them have turned out to be right. This one's got a little bit more credibility to it, or a little bit more to back it up as being legitimate, based off of where it came from. It's the history that it's got, which the church is still skeptical, because this is a rather common-looking locket. And even though there's several prominent Smith women seen in photographs wearing this locket throughout the years, I guess it is possible that it could be a different locket that these women were wearing. Besides this, it's just kind of an average pocket watch size locket. Nothing really stand out about it, but the fact that it's just come to light, it's kind of funny that that they would criticize the headline, saying, "Well, that's just poor journalism to use clickbait like that." I've seen the Deseret News use plenty of clickbait over the years, so they can kick back on it. That's all right. We'll find out. I mean, one way or another, I'm sure we'll figure out one day whether this daguerreotype is legitimate or not.
Yesterday at Sunstone, I talked to Locke McKay, who wrote the article in the John Whitmer Journal about it. I asked him, so what we currently know right now, is this what we're going to know and we just have to kind of give our best guess, or is there more coming? And he thinks there's a lot more coming now that it's out there, that there might be other sources that can shed light on it, and more research to come. So we'll see what happens. I personally, when I saw the photo, I thought right away that, wow, this looks like Joseph Smith to me. I think it seems to resemble the death mask a lot to me. I didn't think, some people have thought it's got to be Hiram, but I don't see Hiram Smith in that at all myself.
No,
in the death mask.
Hiram had more of like a square, more rugged features. Joseph seemed to have a little bit more rounded and softer.
And some sideburns too that were prominent in the paintings, and those aren't there. And so I'm leaning towards Joseph Smith, maybe because I've always been wanting to see a photo of him so bad that maybe my enthusiasm is clouding other things. But I when I look at that face on there, I see what I've always thought from other, and it doesn't resemble the oil painting, but the oil painting doesn't resemble the death mask either.
No, it doesn't.
For me. And so I don't worry that it doesn't look much like the oil painting, but I'm leaning heavily that way. And I hope that that the more we learn, the more we can confirm. But I understand, I don't see that we can ever say that absolutely 100%. But
I hope so.
It'd be nice.
I mean, it would be nice to know. And one of the things that clinchers for me is the commonalities between, say, the death mask, the portraits, and this daguerreotype. Kind of the shape of the mouth, not necessarily. I mean, what should I say? Like the width of it is wider on the daguerreotype than it is, say, on the death mask, than it is on the portrait. But the shape of it, very similar. The face lines, he's got that furrow line in his brow that is, very, it's present in all of them. The rounded sides of his eyes, that's present in all of them. It's just, when it comes to the portrait, you're getting one artist's interpretation, taking different elements and putting it together to see something that looks similar to his subject.
Yes. So we'll see. It's been fun having it there and to finally look at something that I think is a photo of him. Been waiting decades for something like that. So.
Well, for sure. And the contribution that Dives wanted to point out this week is, well, can't we just use Moroni's promise to confirm or deny the authenticity of the new Joseph Smith daguerreotype? Or does that only work with books and facsimiles? Oh, wait. It definitely does not work on facsimiles.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we tend to not want to go out on a limb,
Exactly.
You pray about the Book of Mormon, and it's always a subjective thing that works for you personally, but we don't go out on a limb when it comes to evolution, declaring one thing one way or the other. Just if homosexuality is something you're born with, and anything that we can come back and be embarrassed about later, just one of those things that God's not ready to tell us now, maybe in the during the millennium or something. And so that's our out for everything. But
yeah, for sure. Okay. So now that we've got the follow-ups from last week out of the way, I'm going to lead off with the Mormon joke of the week. So lucky for Dives, he had the joke last week, and so we're back to my turn. And this week's joke of the week comes out of Provo, Utah, where a bishop went into the ward after meetings where people were still kind of mingling around and hobnobbing together. And he decided he was going to try to make a good point. So Bishop Murray goes up to Brother Jenkins over there and says, Brother Jenkins, do you want to go to the Celestial Kingdom? And Brother Jenkins, of course, looks right back at Bishop Murray and says, of course I do. And he says, okay, then please go stand next to the wall over there. And so Brother Jenkins obediently steps over next to the wall. And he goes over to Brother Johnson. Brother Johnson, would you like to go to the Celestial Kingdom? And Brother Johnson says, oh, absolutely, Bishop. He says, well, if you want to go to the Celestial Kingdom, if you really want to go to the Celestial Kingdom, you need to go stand over next to that wall by Brother Jenkins. So Brother Johnson obediently walks over there and stands next to Brother Jenkins, right up against the wall. So they're starting to line up. Well, then comes Brother O'Toole. Brother O'Toole is kind of trying to hide a little bit. And the bishop says, Brother O'Toole, I see you trying to hide there. Would you like to go to the Celestial Kingdom? And Brother O'Toole says, well, to be quite honest, Bishop, no, I would not. He says, Brother O'Toole, are you telling me that you do not want to go to the Celestial Kingdom? Brother O'Toole says, well, you mean ever or today? And the bishop says, well, I mean ever. He says, oh, well, in that case, yeah, I was just afraid that you were starting to take people right now. So that's our Mormon joke of the week.
Yeah, that's kind of my first thought when he was asking them that. I think I was going to ask the same thing, actually. So
exactly, Bishop Murray. I don't know what his point was in trying to line people up, but it's a joke.
Yeah, we don't get to that part.
All right, so on to the news for the week. The big topic this week is fire breaks out inside the Orem Latter-day Saint temple. We're also going back to the Deseret News for this one. Where they've discussed Pat Reeby on July 26th reported that there was a fire that broke out on the third floor of the Orem Temple, which is currently under construction. The Orem Temple, as I recall, is being built just off of I-15 down by the University of Utah, or Utah Valley University is what it is, yeah, UVU. And so while they've been under construction, it's been under construction for, I guess, about a year, but in a third floor, custodial closet is where the fire started, and they're not really sure what happened with it. They're not really thinking it's arson, but they're not really saying either what it could be. I mean, it's certainly possible maybe somebody left a work lamp on. Some of those halogen work lamps, they burn rather hot, and if they're close to anything that's remotely combustible, it'll start a fire. It didn't really, flare up quickly. It kind of was a slow burn that started and then gradually grew, and thankfully people were able to catch the fire in time. It didn't spread too far or cause too much damage, but they are going to have to do a bunch of rework in there to get it fixed. Nobody was injured, thankfully, so...
I would think in the most heavily populated Mormon town on the planet, probably if it was arson, that would be something.
Well, exactly. They would definitely report about that, but they haven't ever really given a follow-up this week either. And that's what really surprised me.
Yeah, I'm guessing it was just an accident. I guess like the other Provo temple now, if that it was a tabernacle that burned and they refurbished it into a temple. So if this one burns, they could refurbish it into a tabernacle, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. So, one way or another, they'll have something to do with the building. But with regards to that other news this week, there was several, I think down in St. George it was, they had 8 LDS buildings that were vandalized and damaged they found the people that did those. But I'm a little surprised at the lack of follow up on this one about the temple fire. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe they just see it as nothing. I mean, if they got it out in time to not do much damage, if they think it was just an accident.
Yeah, and it probably was. Let's see. So the next article I've got here is hashtag Safe Church, Safe Children petition. So this one is actually from a Google Docs, and they're starting a petition regarding this Elders Quorum precedent that was called in Minnesota. For heaven's sakes, my mind's drawing a blank for so much today again. So this gentleman, his name is Michael Adam Davis. He joined the LDS Church in Casson, Minnesota. He was a registered sex offender, but the LDS Church doesn't do background checks when they do callings. And as a result, he was able to prey upon one of the congregation members. And so there's a lot going on there to see what kind of liability the church has, what kind of liability, say, the local bishop has, and how much the state has versus how much this personal guy has. I mean, he's supposed to report that he's a sex offender if he's on the registry. So it's this petition it's got a few stated purposes. It says the purpose of the petition: first, to request two changes from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the LDS Church. One, complete criminal background checks on all members serving in any leadership or volunteer position. Two, follow state-mandated reported laws, which is something that the LDS Church really hasn't had to do very much with regards to clergy. There's the Priest Penitent Act that they've kind of hidden behind to avoid having to follow through with mandatory reporting. Then the second purpose of this is to propose a Minnesota state law that requires faith-based nonprofit organizations to complete criminal background checks on all of their leaders, volunteers, and staff. So I think that this has a lot of potential to be a good change if they can get this pushed forward.
Well, it seems that they should.
Yeah,
I can't imagine why not. And it saves so much potential damage to. If you're working with youth, if you're working with it, I mean, a bishop is going to have, be working with youth behind closed doors and interviews and that type of thing. There's the youth programs. There's so many people that work with youth within the church, and and any calling, you have a chance to really. There's areas there's moments, I should say, where they would want to know about anybody, and they should want to know about anybody, and they should be willing to do that. I think this whole the whole process of selecting people for callings, and a church leader will tell you, well, we do interviews with people, we do our part to study things out in our mind, and then ask God if it's right. And I would think a background check would be part of that, studying things out prior, and weed out people. Then you don't even have to try to pray about it. So I think that's just a given, and those things can be conducted so quickly and so well now that it's just a no-brainer.
Absolutely. So I mean, really, Devery, can you think of any downside of a petition like this gaining footing?
I don't see I see that there might be. I mean, I think anytime there's any kind of pressure from anyone, that there's this desire to resist it. But I don't see any downside from implementing it. I just see there may be some resistance just because, well, we didn't think of it. Others are telling us that's what we need to do, and we run things our way, and we know better. There might be some of that, but there's certainly not a downside to implementing it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's going to be kickback. There always is kickback, but the more I look at it, I think, well, there's not really any downside here of making these steps. It just makes kids safer, and I think that's something I can certainly support. Oh, excuse me, I've got a dry throat here. So our next article, moving right along, comes from UtahStories.com. The title is Pioneer Day and Mormon Pioneer History They Don't Talk About. And this is from July 24th, 2022 by Richard Markosian. And his whole stance on this is he goes back and gives us a bit of a history tour through what happened between Missouri, actually maybe even going back as far as Kirtland, but mostly from Missouri to Nauvoo to out west. What was the whole purpose in Brigham Young leading the Saints out west, and why were they kicked out of Missouri? Was it due to persecution? Was it due to the extermination order by Lilburn Boggs? Who shortly after that extermination order, shortly, I mean, within a few years, I can't remember the timeline for sure. I'm going to have to just mark this one for a follow-up next week to see when Porter Rockwell supposedly went and made an attempt on Lilburn Boggs' life. Shot 4 times in the throat, the neck, and the body. But he survived, pulled through. That was kind of remarkable, actually. So there was a lot of, there was a lot of fighting on both sides of this issue. And so when it comes to the pioneer stories and, all of the trekking west and what was the purpose behind it, they were going to Mexican territory to get out of the clutches of the United States government, which really hadn't given them a lot of sympathy with regards to Joseph Smith being murdered in Carthage jail. Joseph Smith actually had the largest militia in the western United States at the time under his command there in Nauvoo, the Nauvoo Legion. Really big, sizable army, and he was the commander of it. And so it was, at his disposal. If he didn't want to go to Carthage, he didn't have to. But he did, and that's where history led us. So this article is a very different perspective on what pioneer history really is versus, a bunch of handcarts rolling into the Salt Lake Valley in 1847, which the handcarts didn't even come till much later, really. So it's
a couple things in this I kind of wondered about, though. Like, is the consensus that Porter Rockwell made this attempt? I know, I'm not sure if all historians agree on that. I think the article makes it sound like it's a given, but I think there's still a lot. Yeah. And that really, by the time Joseph was incarcerated in Carthage, I think that was settled like the year before, a year and a half before he died. Mm-hmm. January of 43, I think, is when it was kind of thrown out. Yeah, I'm not sure if that ever. I mean, I know the treason. Well, the Nauvoo expositor, the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor, and then he was charged with treason, which the governor didn't even really find that a very because of calling out the militia against the state militia, but Governor Ford thought that the Saints had a reason, at least, to be fearful. I don't think he thought much of the treason charge, but others who introduced it did. But I'm not sure how much. I think the Boggs thing wasn't really a part of this by the time Joseph died.
You make a really good point on that too, Devery, is that this guy that wrote this article makes a lot of assertions that really haven't been proven. Like that there is speculation behind whether or not that actually was Porter Rockwell, because Porter Rockwell was never charged. There was never any evidence to bring charges against him. So,
so he writes this as though this is just settled and a fact, and I think he just needs to be a little more tentative about it.
Yeah, and at the very least, throw some citations in there, bud. This is you're gonna make things like or make some sort of stance like this, especially when you're talking about rewriting pioneer history. Rewrite it through the words of those who lived it. So, I mean, it's out there. There's evidence out there, sure, but I don't see.
As a historian, that's my big thing. Is that we can introduce these other ideas and that, but introduce them for what they are. There's when it's speculation or when there's contradictory stories or interpretations. Yeah, throw that in as well so that it doesn't create misinformation, because it's not like he was trying to correct misinformation about Pioneer Day, but I think he introduced them at the same time.
Yeah. So. But, there's certain things that he could have thrown in there that would have been really interesting to me. Like, what was the purpose behind the Mormon battalion joining up with the United States Cavalry, riding down to Mexico to fight them, or I guess all they really did was build some roads along the way. They didn't really engage in any battles or anything, but, there might have been something there. Like, okay, maybe they were just trying to secure their place in the West so that Brigham Young could practice his leadership or governance of the LDS Church in a place that was not really controlled by any established government, neither the United States nor Mexico. I mean, there could have been something like that put in there. But yeah, he was making a few reaches that I just couldn't quite go with him all the way there.
But it sparked some discussion, hopefully, and hopefully people are talking and looking deeper into it.
And
So hopefully
that's where the truth comes out, isn't it, Devery?
What's that? I'm sorry.
It's where the truth comes out. Is when we spark discussion, we keep talking about it, we keep digging into it and looking into it, and that's how we come to it. Yeah, for sure. All right. Moving on. This gentleman on yourtango.com, this is in the show notes as well if you want to go and read his article. It says, I was a devout Mormon, but abandoned my religion for my wife. He goes by the name Alex Alexander, but this website or blog, as it is, uses that because the author wanted to be anonymous. This was written on July 25th. He was a native of Salt Lake City, and he married a wife who was an agnostic growing up. But he fell in love with her, she fell in love with him, and so she decided to join the church for his sake because that's what he wanted to do. Was he wanted a temple marriage, and she wanted to be married to him, so she knew she had to join the church and go to the temple in order to get the husband she wanted. So then, after 20 years of trying to make it work, she found herself really struggling that she just couldn't. She didn't fit into the typical LDS paradigm. So the poor lady just said, I'm afraid I'm just going to have to leave everything behind. Sorry, Devery. But she ended up leaving her husband after 20 years, and then it only lasted for about a couple of weeks, as I recall him writing in the blog. And she came back and said, maybe we can make this work out. Because, she loves her husband, and he loves his wife, but he also loves his church. And this church, she tried really hard to fit into it, but didn't feel like she did fit into it. And many times that she tried to raise her concerns or find friends within the church, she really struggled. And my heart just really went out to this poor lady that, I know what it's like to try and cram a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't fit, doesn't work. And It didn't work for her, but she really wanted to make it work. So her husband ended up saying, well, we'll make the marriage work, and we'll just kick the church to the back burner for now. So, yeah, it was a really interesting story to read about something that you don't really hear too much about. It's not really spoken of very openly, but boy, it's interesting because this is what real life is, and this is where it really impacts people in those that don't fit the mold, how it impacts them and their loved ones.
Yeah, I remember throughout my life several times hearing a talk in church where someone will say, if you had a choice, if you had to either leave the church or leave your wife, which would you leave if you had to make that choice? And I remember they were always wanting us to come around and say, well, I would stay with the church no matter what. I would leave my wife. And I remember I went through a period of thinking, well, if I was ever faced with the decision, if I had to leave the church or leave my spouse, I started basing it on, well, it depends on who's making me make that decision. If it's the church, then that's pretty abusive. It was a spouse that was abusive. But then I've kind of evolved from that as well, because I've just, I think family, because it's not just you and your spouse, it's you and your spouse and your children. Everybody's affected. And I think, if we're family centered, we need to do all we can to keep our family intact. If it means stepping back, what really do we lose? It's all part of a journey, and we don't know where that journey is going to end up. And so I think we don't let religion tear us apart. I just don't think that that's what benefit comes from that? I don't see one. If your relationship's based on love, and you're faced with that choice, then you stay in your marriage and you let the journey just play out.
Yeah.
And then in the end, I think you'll both be happier. You'll both trust each other more. Had he have just said, well, fine, then leave, how would he have benefited really? And how would she? So now they're working it out together, and he's showing that commitment that it's his turn now to make the sacrifice. And so it was nice to hear that. And I would love to have him write a follow-up in a few years.
Absolutely.
About how this if they're still on the journey, and if he's feeling like he still might come back or whatever, I just like to see what he has to say about it down the road, more than a few years from now.
For sure. He's got he comes from a very steeped Latter-day Saint life, where he does talk about it in there, that there's certain people that their relationship with the Mormon Church, or the LDS Church, I should say, is such that let's see, you have basically those who are inactive, who believe in the church but don't really have much to do with it. What we might call, say, a Jack Mormon. And then there's those who, they love the church, they like the people, but they don't necessarily want to be a part of it themselves. And that's another thing. Like there's a certain class of people in there that maybe they don't feel like they want to live up to the standards. Maybe they like being close to the people, but they don't want to necessarily be that close to the people, so they don't really associate or go to the church all the time. And then there's others that are just in it with both feet, and they just are all in, and they live, eat, breathe, and drink the church all day, every day. And this is the kind of family that he grew up in, and so to marry someone who comes from a different background than that is really remarkable in and of itself. But then to see him make these changes in his life and adapt where he's coming from in his relationship with the church, because he's going to have to deal with the backlash from his own extended family, his parents, his brothers and sisters, his aunts and uncles and cousins. And, that's just kind of the nature of it. People are going to say, well, how come you're letting your wife lead you away from the church? And he's going to have to deal with that brunt, which, tons of people have to deal with, where you have to say, hey, it's not my wife leading me away from the church. This is a matter of my own personal choice, going with my wife, even if that means going away from the church. So it's a tough position to be in. Certainly wish this guy, this anonymous fellow who wrote the article, the best, and I absolutely would love to read a follow-up as years go by. And our final article, we go back to the Babylon Bee, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Babylon Bee, Devery, but they're kind of like the Onion for Mormonism.
Yeah,
or for Christianity.
I was on their mailing list for a while. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't seem to be on it now. But I'm familiar with it.
This article is 10 Great Excuses for Not Reading Your Bible. So I'm just going to go right down the list, if you don't mind. It's kind of amusing. If it's not anything other than tongue in cheek, it's just kind of funny to listen to. So here's some of the best excuses for not reading your Bible. Number 1, you just went to church last month and don't want to overdo it because you don't want to be an extremist. Number 2, it's not as encouraging as Your Best Life Now, which is by Joel Osteen's by Joel Osteen. His prose is to die for. 3, if you take your eyes off the Hot Pocket you're microwaving for 1 second, it might burn, and we all know that. And then you'd be hungry, but God wouldn't want that. 4, you've already watched The Chosen. It's so hard to get into a good book if you already know how it ends. So, yeah, I can see where they're coming from there. They watched the movie. Yeah, so number 5, those 900 Korok seeds in Zelda Breath of the Wild aren't going to collect themselves. Finding Korok seeds is a metaphor for finding Christ, probably. Number 6, you're Donald Trump and you don't need forgiveness. He has never done anything wrong, ever. So that's true. That's a possibility. Number 7, you're still recovering from the story of Ehud, which I'm not sure if... I'm sure you're familiar, Devery, with the story of Ehud from the Bible. I believe it comes from, is it Judges or Kings? I couldn't look it up before, but yeah, Ehud, the fat king, where the young prophet comes in and stabs him with a knife, and it's Ehud, the king, is so fat that this knife sinks in and swallows the hilt and the guy's hand, and he has to pull his hand out. It's just disgusting. Enough to give you anyone PTSD for sure. So, number 8, you misplaced your copy, and new ones are so hard to find. I mean, you have to walk all the way to the back of the Barnes & Noble to get a Bible anymore. Number 9, the Jordan Peterson lecture on Genesis you watched has you covered. Yeah, up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who from paradise, And number 10, it's not like the Bible is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work, or anything like that. Because if it were, you definitely meditated on it day and night, right? So, gotta love the Babylon Bee. Those guys... you can't take them too seriously, but that's kind of the fun of it. Is we really appreciate them adding some humor to our day.
Yeah. Well, my first thought was, there are a lot of self-help books out there, and you have to go to the Bronze Age and deal with King James English to have a good self-help book these days.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well said, Devery. All right. So the last bit of this podcast, we have a poll out there. It's available only on Anchor, but the poll this week is the word Mormon a major victory for Satan? As we play the outro music, I mean, that's exactly the quote that we get from Russell M. Nelson. But here's the questionnaire. So, Devery, I'm going to read these off, and you tell me where your stance is on this. Is the word Mormon a major victory for Satan? 1. Fetch no. The thousands of people who joined the church after viewing the expensive worldwide and church-sponsored I'm a Mormon campaign proves it. Number 2. Absolutely. As Elder David Bednar remarked in May 2022 at the National Press Club luncheon, we can't let this pejorative of our enemies define and destroy our faith. 3. I doubt it. Remember, the prophet Joseph Smith said the word Mormon means more good. Number 4. No way. President Thomas Monson was proud to be a Mormon boy, and I am proud to support the Mormon News Roundup. That's right. Number 5. You bet. And in order to thwart Satan, we need to immediately change the official name of the Book of Mormon to the Book of Moroni's Dad. Okay. 6.
I love that one.
Heck yes. The word Mormon is basically the same as the N-word. Or number 7, with all the suffering in the world, what difference does it make? So, of those 7 options, where do you stand, Devery?
I could pick a few of them out of there. I mean, immediately comes to mind is with all the suffering, what difference does it make? Why make this a big deal?
Yeah.
If Satan, if it's a victory for Satan, we let him have his way for the first 188 years or 86 years or whatever. And so, he has to, now he has to be retrained or, so we've got to work on him too now. So it's just like easier. Let's let it stay the way it was. And he's fine. We're fine. Mormon's fine. We lived with it. We had a great campaign under Gordon B. Hinckley. Yeah. And the thing is about President Nelson too, when he gave that talk in 1984 and he kind of was, talking about it then and just, then his wife talks about how he always wanted to do these things. And he's now unleashed. I just hate the thought of, we do all this now because someone who's had this pet peeve for decades got to be unleashed. So
what next? Dallin H. Oaks, we're going to get to his pet peeves
and he makes his known, so that's
exactly.
So
is this just going to be like a hierarchy of curmudgeons getting to voice their pet ideas and stuff? I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing that bothers me is that number 2 one, when I hear people say that this was a pejorative term that was invented by enemies of the church. I'm like, well, nobody thought up the word Mormon until Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon. That's where the term came from. It's not like Mormon was a common word back in 1820s or in the 1830s even.
If they had just called it another testament of Jesus Christ, then not as
Absolutely.
a subtitle, but as the title.
As the title itself, I think that's great.
The Mormon would be just like Nephi. It wouldn't be any more used or less. It would just be a character from the. So you give the book that name. We open the door for the title for the nickname we now don't like. So
and then we'd go by something like the Testamenters or the Smithites or something like that.
Yeah, Golden Bible was kind of cool. I thought. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, history could have certainly gone a lot differently. Could have gone. A lot better, could have gone a lot worse too. So I'm just glad to figure out where we're at, and I'm very glad that Signature Books has been willing to sponsor us and partner with us here, and look forward to all the things that are coming down the line from Signature Books. Thank you so much, Devery, for joining us today and for your support.
Oh, happy to support and happy to be here today. So thanks for having me.
Yep, and we'll look forward to having D-Bays back again with us next time, and I'll go ahead and play us out with our outro music, which is, Semantics for Satan. I keep calling it Sympathy for Satan, but that's the original Rolling Stones song, but Semantics for Satan. And we'll see you all next week.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number 1 goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.